So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander. Today we're doing something a little bit different. It's just me here today, and I wanted to put some feelers out. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some books and some corresponding war games, because if you don't know, growing up all through secondary school and sixth form college, I studied English literature, always loved books. I've got all these war games here. I've got shelves of books over there. You know, a lot of it's classic literature or fiction stuff. But more recently, I've been getting into more more history stuff. So what I was thinking might be interesting, at least, is just gives me a platform to talk about books that I enjoyed or didn't enjoy. But then to tie some of those into some of the war games that we've played, and maybe that might inspire you to pick up a book on a game that you're interested in, or if you too have read a book, that there's more that you can do than just reading a book. There might be, maybe you're inspired to play a game about a book that you may have read. So we'll see. Let me know if a series like that, and this will be sporadic because reading takes a lot longer than playing a game, if that would be interesting, if you'd like to see more of that, and if what we talk about here is helpful or interesting. So all of the ramble out of the way. What we're going to talk about today is a book that I read called The Reformation, and this is by Patrick Collinson. So I picked this up off of my late father's bookshelf. So he had a massive library. Tons of it was non-fiction, a lot of it military history. And I was over in the UK, and I would kind of rifle through the old shelves of books, and I took about 10 or 15, stuck them in my suitcase or at home. This was one of them, because I know kind of on a surface level a decent amount about the Reformation. I have a religious background, and so that was something that I kind of knew about. And we've played some games, and we'll talk about those here in just a second. But I'd never read kind of a study of it or anything like that. There's an old film with, I think it's Joseph Fiennes. I think that's what his name is. If not, it's Ralph Fiennes, but I don't know. But called Luther. It's very, very good. I don't know how necessarily accurate it is, but it's a really great biography. I've watched that a few times. That's a great watch. If you're interested in Martin Luther anyway, that old film from the mid-2000s, really, really, just a great watch anyway, great acting in it too. But anyway, the book by Patrick Collinson. So Patrick Collinson is an English or British academic, and he has taught at many prestigious universities about medieval religious history and then Reformation period history, mostly from a religious standpoint. He goes into some of the politics and some of the conflict side of it too. But this book, 180 odd pages, is a synthesis of and kind of a pretty high level overview of the Reformation. So I thought this would be a great primer or something to kind of get into. What I would tell you is that there is a good amount of assumed religious jargon and knowledge in this book. Luckily, I have a background in that, and so that wasn't a problem for me. But they took a lot of things for granted. That some things are explained in footnotes and endnotes and bits and pieces, but that was something where I'm like, I don't know how transparent some of that would be if you hadn't, studied religion at school in a pretty intense way, or had a religious background, where just about some of the core beliefs and catechisms of different churches and what things mean. They explain some of the stuff and why some of the different schisms between sects and things happened based on a religious philosophy. But a lot of it, they just kind of they talk in a religious parlance, and you I don't know. I'd be interested to see if anyone had read this and didn't have that background, and maybe some of those things were a bit kind of slower going, a bit more opaque. So just know that kind of going into this. The other part of this is that they talk about some of the wars of the religion, especially in France, that's mentioned, and it talks about the struggle between the Catholics and the Protestants in England, between Henry VIII and then Mary, Queen of Scots, being Catholic, and then her being ousted, and then Elizabeth coming. So you get, and they talk about, some of the things that were done one way or the other, but I was hoping that this would have a little bit more in that, of the actual conflict parts of it. It talked a little bit about the Schmalkaldic League formation and the peasants' uprising and rebellion, but the military campaigns are talked about, but not really laid out and explored in as much detail. Again, it's 180 pages, but this is more of a kind of a religious and a social and a political exploration rather than a military one. So that was, and we'll start talking about the games here, because I was hoping it would have more of that stuff in it, because I also think that stuff's very interesting, and the nexus of social, political, personal, individual, and then military affairs, especially kind of in a time like this, post-medieval, is very, very interesting. So if you're interested in this time period, you most likely have already played, but if you haven't, you need to play Here I Stand. This game is a classic. So this is the 500th anniversary edition from GMT Games. Here I Stand is a 2 to 6 player game. You want to play this with 6 players though. You're going to spend all day playing it, and it is incredible. So on the back of the box here, it's a map of Europe, almost like the entirety of Europe. We don't have a lot of Scandinavia in there, but the factions are, I think it's the Ottomans, the Habsburgs, the French, the Papal States, or the Papacy, I think is what they call it, the Protestants, and then the English. And so you control one of those factions. This is a point-to-point movement card-driven game played over the course of about 50 years. So the things that you're doing, it shows you the slowness of military campaigns, and especially of like sieges and laying siege to fortified cities and towns, where per card play, which is like, a number of months, if not a year, you can only do like one attempt to really change the situation. It takes a long time, for the Ottomans to besiege Vienna, for example, if they're going to ever do it successfully. So it's this really grand game, but in this you also have the papacy and you have the Protestants, and they play like this kind of separate game within the context of this larger military game that's going on. And so it's very interesting, because the first thing you do is you do the Diet of Worms, and then you play the Here I Stand card, and it's the 95 thesis. And so the kind of religious struggle starts, I think, I don't know if it has to start in Württemberg, but I can't remember. But the Protestant player starts flipping over control tokens, because all the control tokens in this game, or most of them at least, they represent political or military control, but the side of which they're facing is either a dark-colored side for Catholic or a light-colored side for Protestant. And so it's this two-layered game of control where, I might be the French marching around trying to do all of this military and political control with my armies, but then I've got Calvin down in Geneva who's like flipping some of those over away from Catholic towards Protestant, and that's not great for me, because that's helping a different player win. Even though I've got military control, I don't have religious control necessarily. The interplay between all of the different factions is so fascinating, And what was nice is having read this gave a lot of context to a lot of the cards that have a little explanation and a picture on them, and you kind of see what they do, but this kind of high-level synthesis calls out a lot of what's in this game, and that was something that I really, really appreciated. So when you play this, when Calvin comes out, you place him in Geneva, he doesn't move the whole game. You can't move him. He doesn't function in the same way that some of the other debaters and bits and pieces do. And so you get a bit of context of why, because it explains about his life and what he did and why he kind of set up in Geneva and, you know, preached the place into submission, basically. And that was kind of a base of operations there. It's so fascinating to see a wider context to some of the card play and the things that you're doing here in this game. This game is rich, it is deep, it's been around a long time, it's had a number of editions. This is a game I probably can't recommend highly enough if you have any interest in this period of time. So that's Here I Stand, which was a really great companion. When I was reading this, genuinely, anytime it would reference anything from this game, I had Here I Stand in my mind the whole time. And that was really cool because, you know, the Protestant player literally has a little track on their player board of they're translating the New Testament and then they're translating the Old Testament. And once you get those done, you get bonus Reformation attempts in the language into which you were translating. All of that stuff's called out in this book, and you do all of that in that game so that you can kind of spread your influence across Europe. Really, really neat. The other game that is probably not going to be a surprise to anyone is the sequel to it, Virgin Queen, because this book goes all the way up to and even slightly past Elizabeth I. Now, Virgin Queen is the same kind of core system, but you're playing based on the assumptions of this having ended historically. So they also took an opportunity to tighten up the religious conflict in this one. So it functions very differently. The political landscape is also very different. And then they also added in a whole bunch of other stuff on top, which is, again, something that's very interesting also. So in this one, you have the factions are different. You have the Dutch, which are a Protestant-based faction, and then they have like some sub-factions that they can kind of pop up elsewhere. The Habsburgs have kind of gone into a decline, and the Holy Roman Empire has been established, so that's a faction. Then there's the French. The papacy isn't a played faction, so you have like the Spanish, the French, the English, the Dutch, the Holy Roman Empire, and you have again the Ottomans. Now, in this one, there is still that religious struggle, much more between kind of the Dutch and the French and the Holy Roman Empire in this one. What's really neat in this one is that the Holy Roman Empire, by definition a Catholic, but had some, they were a bit more liberal from a leadership standpoint because they understood that you had to somewhat go with the flow of the people to be able to retain control of them. So at the beginning of the game, the Holy Roman Empire player has to kind of try to guess the outcome of the religious war that's going on, which is done on a track. And if they guess correctly, then they get a bunch of victory points at the end. So they can either guess that the Catholics will definitely win, in which case they'll get a bunch of points, but the French will also have probably got a bunch of points. Or they'll guess that the Protestants will have definitely won, which is great because you get points, but also, you know, the Dutch, the Protestants will probably also have done really well. So, or you can play the middle where you can say, okay, I'm betting that it's not particularly conclusive. I'll get fewer points, but there won't be like a massive swing one way or the other for a different player. And you have to, before the game starts, you write down on a piece of paper who you think's going to win, and you kind of reveal it at the end. And it's such a really neat piece of game mechanic, and I really enjoy that kind of thing. But this one also, you know, it's Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, so probably this game is more political than religious based versus Here I Stand, but it's still really great. Here you have the New Worlds, all of kind of you know, the North and South American continents and the West Indies and all that. You have to go and explore those, stake claim to those. This one has great artists and scientists that you can patronize to get prestige. This is very much the beginning of the real empire building that was happening, especially between the French, the Spanish, and the English. So if you think, in this game, you've then got the Spanish Armada that can be built. You have the gunpowder plot that I believe, that the Catholics can go up against Charles I, and they can win a game outright by successfully doing that. It's very difficult, and it can be defended against, but that was a very, very huge point of tension that was going on between the English and the Spanish player in this game that was also fascinating. So there is also this religious struggle that's going on, and then you've got, the Ottomans who are there just like pillorying Eastern Europe and marching up with their armies and stuff. But this is probably, even though this is called The Wars of the Religion, is the subtitle, this is probably more war-based and empire-building focused than this one. I feel like this one, it's very much in the kind of the nitty-gritty of the Reformation itself. And I come back to this book because, again, they don't discuss as much of the actual conflicts as I maybe would have hoped, because obviously I feel like that's kind of what we focus on. But it was very interesting as a high-level kind of a religious and social overview of what the Reformation meant. And they tried to answer some of those questions of like, was the Reformation one event? Or was it a string of events? Did it start back in the Great Schism in like the 14th century? What were the effects of it? Because, they briefly highlight of like what happened after, had the medieval period, had the Reformation, how long was the Reformation going on? And it led to like the Renaissance and this Age of Enlightenment afterwards. Was that because of the Reformation and a change in thinking? Or was that kind of stuff inevitable to happen at some point? There's a lot of great stuff that's discussed in this. And these currently are the two big games that cover this kind of a topic. There is actually, we have a pre-production copy of a game called The Wars of Religion by a French company, which I'm like, very interested to play that, because it hits right into this topic that I've been reading about, and two games that I already love, but it's much more focused. I believe it's like in France and maybe a little bit of other Western Europe, but it is like the French Wars of Religion. And so I thought that was a perfect opportunity. So at some point there's more of that coming, because that's a very much more focused and detailed view of the military campaigns of the Wars of the Religion, which is such an interesting topic to me. Also, having grown up around that area, it's something that the effects of it still pervade today in the way that people think, and some of the beliefs that are held in different areas and regions, and all of that stuff is called out in this book. So this book was great. It wasn't exactly what I expected, but there's some great games to go along with this theme that I feel like almost anyone's going to enjoy. This one is maybe a little bit easier to get to. So this one is a little bit more complicated. It has a little bit more kind of added extra stuff, a little bit more admin, things to take care of, but it is still an absolute joy to play. So if you have any interest in this period, this was an interesting book. It was a bit harder work than some of the other books that I've read, but it was, I felt, pretty helpful as a synthesis for the religious and the kind of more the social and political side of the Reformation. So if you're interested, check this out. This is The Reformation by Patrick Collins. Here's some games to go along with it. These will be a winner no matter what your table is. Get lots of people together and sit down and carve out a whole day to do this. You will have a great time. But appreciate you very much tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.